Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So I'll be continuing this evening with the talk that I started the last time I read out of this book. So the title of this talk again is called Becoming a Samaṇa, and it's out of the collection Still Flowing Water, translated by Ajahn Chah. So I'll be starting on page 95, and what I'll do is I'll reread the last paragraph that I read from the previous reading, and that should summarize what Luang Por was teaching about, and then I'll just continue on from there. When you're firm in these things, when you have virtue and concentration, then you will also have the quality of contemplating what's right and what's wrong. Is this right? Is this wrong? These questions will arise with every preoccupation that comes to the mind. When sights make contact, when sounds make contact, when smells make contact, when tactile sensations make contact, when ideas make contact. A knower will appear, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, sometimes pleased. It will know good preoccupations, bad preoccupations. You'll get to see all kinds of things. If you're restrained, you'll get to see all kinds of things coming in, as well as the reactions in the mind, in the knower. You'll be able to contemplate them. Because you've exercised restraint and are firm in your restraint, then whatever passes in there, the reactions in terms of your bodily actions, your speech, and your mind will show themselves. Things good or evil, right or wrong will arise. And then when you choose or select the proper preoccupation, this is what's called a thin layer of discernment. This discernment will appear in your heart. This is called virtue, concentration, and discernment all at once. This is how they first arise. What arises next will be attachment. This is where you're attached to goodness. You'll be afraid that your mind will be negligent or mistaken in various ways, afraid that your concentration will be destroyed. This will arise because you love your concentration a lot. You are very protective, very diligent, very persistent. When any preoccupation makes contact, you're afraid of it, wary, concerned. You see this or that person acting wrongly, and you see everything. You're very possessive. This is a level of virtue, a level of concentration, a level of discernment, the external level. You see things in line with the Buddha's laws. This is a beginning stage. It has to be established in your mind. You need to have it in your mind. These qualities arise really strongly in the mind, to the point where, wherever you go, you see everyone acting wrongly. You get happy and sad, you start having doubts, all kinds of things. You're always ready to pounce on other people's mistakes. This is going overboard, but that's not a problem for the time being. Let it go overboard for now. You first have to look after your bodily actions, look after your speech, look after your mind as much as you can. There's nothing wrong with this. This is called one level of virtue. Virtue, concentration, and discernment are all there together. In terms of the perfections, this is the first level of the perfections, dana parami, sila parami. That's one level. The one you've already reached. The next level, dana uppaparami, sila uppaparami, is something else that has to grow out of this. It takes things to a level more refined than this. You're distilling something refined out of something crude, that's all. You don't get the next level from anything else far away. When you've established this foundation, practicing it in your heart in the first stage, you develop a sense of conscience, a sense of fear both in private and public places. The heart is really afraid, on edge at all times. The mind takes its sense of right and wrong and its preoccupation at all times. The mind takes its sense of right and wrong as its preoccupation at all times. It's preoccupied with exercising restraint over your bodily actions and speech, always firm in this way. It's really firmly attached. This is virtue, concentration, and discernment in line with the Buddha's rules. As you keep looking after things in this way, keep practicing continually in this way, these qualities will grow fully in your heart. But this level of virtue, concentration, and discernment hasn't yet reached the level of jhana. These things are still fairly crude. They're refined, but they're the refined level of what's crude. They're the refinement of ordinary, run-of-the-mill people who've never done this before, never restrained their behavior before, never meditated, never practiced before. So for them, this level is refined. It's like 5 baht or 10 baht, which have meaning for poor people. For people who have money by the millions, 5 or 10 baht means nothing. That's the way it is. If you're poor, you want a baht or two. This has meaning only for people who are poor and lacking. Your ability to abandon gross forms of harm has meaning for ordinary run-of-the-mill people who've never abandoned them before, and you can be proud on this level. You've fully completed this level. You'll see this for yourself. All those who practice have to maintain this in their hearts. When this is the case, you're said to be walking the path of virtue, the path of concentration, the path of discernment. Virtue, concentration, and discernment all at once. They can't separate out. When your virtue is good, the firmness of the mind grows even firmer. When the mind is firm, your discernment gets sharper. These things become synonymous for one another. You practice continually. It's right practice without gaps. So if you practice in this way, you're said to have entered the first stage of the path of practice. This is a crude level, something a little hard to maintain, but the refined levels of virtue, concentration, and discernment all come out of this. It's as if they're distilled from the same thing. To put it in simple terms, it's like a coconut tree. A coconut tree absorbs ordinary water up through its trunk, but when the water reaches the coconuts, it's sweet and clean. It comes from ordinary water, the trunk, the crude dirt. But as the water gets absorbed up the tree, it gets distilled. It's the same water, but when it reaches the coconuts, it's cleaner than before, and sweet. In the same way, the virtue, concentration, and discernment of your path are crude, but if the mind contemplates these things until they're more and more refined, their crudeness will disappear. They get more and more refined, so that the area you have to maintain grows smaller and smaller into the mind. Then it's easy. Things get closer to you. Now at this stage, you don't make any big mistakes. It's simply that when an issue strikes the heart, a question arises. For example, is acting in this way right or wrong? Or is speaking in this way right? Is speaking in this way wrong? This sort of thing. You abandon things and come closer and closer in, continually closer in. Your concentration is even firmer. Your discernment sees even more easily. The end result is that you see things simply in terms of the mind and its preoccupations. You don't go splitting off into bodily speech or to bodily actions or speech. You don't go splitting off to anything at all. When we talk about affairs of body and mind, the body and mind depend on each other. You see what exercises control over the body, the mind. Whatever the body does is because of the mind. Now, before the mind exercises control over the body, the impulse comes from the preoccupations making contact with the mind and then exercising control over the mind. So as you keep on contemplating inwardly, your subtlety will gradually develop. The end result is that there's nothing but the mind and its preoccupations. In other words, the body, which is a physical phenomenon, becomes non-physical. The mind no longer grasps at its physicality. It turns its aspect as a physical thing into something non-physical, a mind object or preoccupation that makes contact with the mind. Eventually, everything is just a matter of the mind and its preoccupations, the preoccupations that arise along with our mind. Our mind. This is where we begin to fathom the nature of our mind. Our mind has no issues. It's like a scrap of cloth or a flag that's fastened to the end of a pole and just stays there. Nothing happens. Or like a leaf left to its own nature. It stays still. Nothing happens. The fact that the leaf flutters is because of something else, the wind. The nature of the leaf itself is that it stays still and doesn't do anything to anybody. The fact that it moves is because something else comes and makes contact. When the wind makes contact, the leaf flutters back and forth. It's the same with the nature of our mind. There's no love, no hatred, no blaming of anyone. It stays as it is in that way. It's a condition that's really pure, clean, clear and clean. It stays in peace, with no pleasure, no pain, no feelings at all. That's the genuine condition of the mind. The reason we practice is to explore inwardly, explore inwardly, explore inwardly, to contemplate inwardly until we reach the primal mind that's called the pure mind. The pure mind is the mind without any issues. No preoccupations are passing by. In other words, it doesn't go running after preoccupations. It doesn't criticize this or that, doesn't get pleasure in this way or that. It's not happy about this thing or sad about that. And yet the mind is always aware. It knows what's going on. When the mind is in this state, then when preoccupations come blowing through, good, bad, whatever the preoccupations, when they come blowing or cogitating in the mind is aware of them but stays as it is. It doesn't have any issues. It doesn't waver. Why? Because it's aware of itself. It's aware of itself. It's constructed freedom within itself. It's reached its own condition. How has it been able to reconstruct its primal condition? Because the knower has contemplated in a subtle way to see that all things are simply manifestations of properties and elements. There's nobody doing anything to anybody. As when pleasure or pain arises, when pleasure arises, it's just pleasure, that's all. When pain arises, it's just pain, that's all. It doesn't have any owner. The mind doesn't make itself the owner of pleasure, doesn't make itself the owner of pain. It watches these things and sees that they're nothing for it to take. They're separate kinds of things, separate kinds of affairs. Pleasure is just pleasure, that's all. Pain is just pain, that's all. The mind is simply what knows these things. Before, when there was a basis for greed, aversion, or delusion, the mind would take these things on as soon as it saw them. It would take on pleasure. It would take on pain. It went right into them to feed on them. We took pleasure and pain without stop. That's a sign that the mind wasn't aware of what it was doing. It wasn't bright. It didn't have any freedom. It went running after its preoccupations. A mind that runs after its preoccupations is a destitute mind. When it gets a good preoccupation, it's good along with it. When it gets a bad preoccupation, it's bad along with it. It forgets itself, that its primal nature is something neither good nor bad. If the mind is good along with its preoccupations, that's a deluded mind. When bad comes and it's bad, too. When pain comes and it's pained, too. When pleasure comes and it's pleased, too, the mind turns into a world. Its preoccupations are a world. They're stuck with the world. They give rise to pleasure, pain, good, bad, all kinds of things. And they're not all for sure. And they're all not for sure. If the mind leaves its primal nature, nothing's for sure. There's nothing but taking birth and dying, quivering and wavering, suffering and lacking. Nothing but difficulties for a long, long time. These things have no way of coming to closure. They're all just part of the cycle. When we contemplate them with subtlety, we see that they have to keep on being the way we've been in the past. As for the mind, it doesn't have any issues. When it does have issues, it's because we grasp onto things, like the praise and blame of human beings. If someone says, "You're evil," why do you suffer? You suffer because you understand that they're criticizing you, so you pick that up and put it in your heart. The act of picking it up, knowing it and taking it on that way, is because you're not wise to what it is, and so you catch hold of it. When you do that, it's called stabbing yourself with clinging. When you've stabbed yourself, there's becoming that gives rise to birth. With some people's words, if we don't pay them any attention or take them on, when we leave them simply as sounds, that's all. Then there are no issues. Say a Khmer person curses you. You hear it, but it's just sounds. Khmer sounds, that's all. They're just sounds. When you don't know their meaning, that they're cursing you, the mind doesn't take them on. In this way, you can be at your ease. Or if Vietnamese or any other people of different languages curse you, all you hear are the sounds. All you hear are sounds. You're at your ease because you don't bring them in to stab the mind. This mind, speaking about the arising and passing away of the mind, these things are easy to know when we can keep contemplating in this way continually inward. The mind gradually becomes more and more refined because it has passed through the crude stages of the practice. Your concentration gets even more inwardly firm, more inwardly focused. The more it contemplates inwardly, the more sure it is that this state of mind isn't influenced by anything. The mind like this is really convinced that it isn't influenced by anything, by any preoccupations. Preoccupations are preoccupations, the mind is the mind. The fact that the mind is pleased or pained, good or bad, is because it falls for its preoccupations. If it doesn't fall for its preoccupations, it has no issues. It doesn't waver. This condition is called a condition of awareness. All the things that it knows are manifestations of the properties and elements. They simply arise and pass away, arise and pass away. Even though you sense this, you can't yet let go. But at this point, whether you can or can't let go doesn't matter. Simply hold to this awareness or this perception as a first stage in dealing with the mind. You keep going inward, grinding down and killing your defilements continually. And when you then see the mind withdraws. Our foremost teacher, or the texts call this the change of lineage mind, Gotrabu Chitta. This is the mind transcending the human lineage, the mind of a run-of-the-mill person, and heading towards being a noble one, which comes out of run-of-the-mill people like us. The Gotrabu individual steps into the Nibbana mind, but can't yet go all the way. He withdraws to continue practicing on another level. To compare this with a person, it's like a person who's trying to cross a stream. One foot is on the bank of the stream, the other foot is on the far bank of the stream. He realizes that there is this bank and a far bank, but can't yet get across. So he pulls back. The state of understanding that there is both a this bank and a far bank, that's the Gotrabu individual or the Gotrabu mind. What this means is that he understands but can't yet get across. Sorry, I was mispronouncing that Pali word, Gotrabu. Okay. What this means is that he understands but can't yet get across. He pulls back after realizing that these things exist. Then he carries on, developing his perfections. He sees that this is for sure, that this is the way things are, and that he's going to have to end up going right there. To put it in simple terms, at this point we see the condition of our practice. That if we really contemplate what's happened, we'll see that the mind has a path that we'll have to follow. We know the first step of the path is that gladness and sadness are not the path for us to follow. We're sure to understand this, and that's the way it really is. If you're glad, it's not the path because it gives rise to stress. If you're sad, it can give rise to stress. We think in these terms, but we can't yet let these things go. So where will we go that it's right? We take gladness and sadness, put them on either side, and try to walk down the middle. When we keep this in mind, we're right on the path. We comprehend this, but we can't yet do it. As long as we can't yet do it, then if we get stuck on pleasure or pain, we always know we're stuck, and that's when we can be right. When the mind is stuck on pleasure in this way, we don't approve of it. When the mind is stuck on pain, we don't despise it. We now get to watch them. Pleasure is wrong. Pain is wrong. We understand that they're not the path. We know, yet even though we know, we can't let them go. We can't let them go, and yet we know. When we know, we don't approve of pleasure. We don't approve of pain. We don't approve of either of them, and we have no doubts, for we know that they're the same in not being the path. This way isn't the path. That way isn't the path. So we take the middle as our constant preoccupation. If we can gain release from pleasure and pain, this will appear as the path. Our mind will step into it and know, but it can't yet go all the way. So it withdraws to continue practicing. When pleasure arises and we get stuck on it, we take the pleasure up to contemplate. When pain arises and we get stuck on it, we take up the pain to contemplate, until our knowledge is equal to the pleasure, equal to the pain. That's when the mind will let go of pleasure, let go of pain, let go of gladness, let go of sadness. It lets go of all these worlds. The mind can become lokavidu, expert with regard to worlds. When it lets go, when the knower lets go, it settles right down at that spot. Why can it settle there? Because it already entered there before, that spot that it knew but couldn't go to. So when the mind is stuck on pleasure and pain, and yet we don't fall for them, we keep trying to clear them away. That's when we reach the level of Yogavachara, a person traveling the path but not yet reaching the end. These conditions are things we can focus on in the moments of our own mind. We don't have to examine any preoccupations at all. When we're stuck on either side, we make ourselves know that they're wrong for sure, because both sides are stuck in the world. Pleasure is stuck in the world. Pain is stuck in the world. When we're stuck in the world can come into being. Why? This world can come into being and get established because our knowledge isn't quick enough. The world doesn't come into being from anything else. And because our knowledge isn't quick enough, we enter in and label things, fabricate fabrications. Right here is where the practice is fun. Whatever we're stuck on, we attack it right away without letting up. If we're stuck on pleasure, we attack it right away. The mind doesn't let up. If we're stuck on pain, we catch it right away and contemplate it. This is where the thread is about to enter the eye of the needle. The mind doesn't let up on these preoccupations, and it doesn't resist the practice. Even when we're wrong, we know we're wrong. The mind isn't heedless. That big mind isn't heedless. It's kind of like walking along and stepping on a thorn. We don't want to step on thorns. We're as careful as can be, and yet we still step on it. Are we content to step on it? When we step on it, we're not content when we know the path. We know that this is the world, this is stress, this is the cycle. We know, and yet we still step on it anyhow. The mind goes along with pleasure, happy or sad, and yet we're not content. We try to eradicate these things, eradicate the world out of the mind at all times. The mind at this point keeps building, practicing, developing. This is the effort of the practice. The mind contemplates, talks to itself about what's happening inside it. These sorts of things. When the mind uproots a world, it keeps moving inward, moving inward. At this point, all the knowers, when they know, simply know without reacting. Their knowledge is equal to things, totally clear, and they don't take part in anything at all. They're not slaves to anyone. They don't take part in anything. They know, but they don't take. They know and put things down. They know and let go. There's still pleasure there. There's still pain. Whatever there is, it's still there. But the mind doesn't take it up. When we see this, we know, oh, this is what the mind is like. This is what preoccupations are like. The mind separates from preoccupations. Preoccupations separate from the mind. The mind is the mind. Preoccupations are preoccupations. When you're aware of both these things, and when they make contact, you know right then. When the mind makes contact, you know right then. When the practice of a yoga vachara senses this at all times, whether standing, walking, or sitting, or lying down, that's called practicing the practice in the shape of a circle. It's right practice. We don't lose presence of mind. We don't look simply at crude things. We look inwardly at things that are refined. We put external matters aside and watch just the mind and the body, or just the mind and its preoccupations. We watch them arise, watch them disband, watch them arise and disband, watch them disband and arise, disbanding, arising, arising, disbanding, disbanding, and then arising, arising, and then disbanding, until ultimately we watch just this disbanding, kaya vaya, ending, disintegrating. Ending and disintegrating are their normal nature. When the mind is like this, it doesn't trace things anywhere. It's up on what it's doing. When it sees, it simply sees, that's all. When it knows, it simply knows, that's all. It does this on its own. This is something that can't be fabricated. So don't go groping around in your practice. Don't have any doubts. This applies to your following the precepts, as I've already said. Contemplate to see what's wrong and what's not. When you've seen that it's wrong, abandon it. Don't have any doubts. The same with your concentration. Keep making the mind quiet, making it peaceful. If there are thoughts, don't worry about it. If there are no thoughts, don't worry about it. Get acquainted with the workings of the mind. Some people want the mind to be peaceful, but they don't understand peace. They don't understand the peace of the mind. There are two kinds of peace, the peace of concentration and the peace of discernment. The peace of concentration is diluted, very diluted. The peace of concentration comes when the mind grows still from not having any preoccupations, and then it gets stuck on the pleasure. But when it meets up with preoccupations, it crumbles. It's afraid of preoccupations, afraid of pleasure, afraid of pain, afraid of criticism, afraid of praise, afraid of sights, sounds, smells, tastes. This kind of concentration is afraid of everything. Once you gain it, you don't want to come out to the rest of the world. A person with this kind of concentration stays only in caves, feeding on pleasure, and doesn't want to come out. Wherever it's quiet, that's where he goes to hide out. It's really stressful, this kind of concentration. You can't come out and live with other people. You can't stand to look at sights, listen to sounds. You can't stand to experience anything. You have to keep staying in a quiet place. You can't let anyone speak. The place has to be quiet. This kind of peace is useless. When you reach that level of peace, you have to come out. The Buddha never said to practice in that way. If you're practicing in that way, stop. When you're peaceful, come out to contemplate. Use the peace of the mind to contemplate. Apply it to preoccupations. Use it to contemplate sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, and ideas. First come out, and then use the peace to contemplate. For instance, you can contemplate hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, these kinds of things. Contemplate inconstancy, stress, and not self. Contemplate the entire world. Once you've used the peace of the mind to contemplate, then when the time comes to be quiet, sit in concentration and let the mind grow peaceful inwardly. Then bring the peace out again to contemplate. Use it to train yourself, to cleanse the mind, to contend with things. When you develop awareness, bring it out to contend with things. Use it to train yourself, to practice. Because if your awareness stays only in there, you won't know anything. It simply pacifies the mind. Keep bringing it out to contemplate what's outside and let it go back in to be quiet, like this, over and over again until the mind's big level of peace arises. As for the peace of discernment, when the mind is peaceful and then comes out, discernment isn't afraid of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, or ideas. It's fearless. As soon as these things make contact, it knows them. As soon as they make contact, it discards them, puts them down, lets them go. This is the peace of discernment. When the mind reaches this stage, it's more refined than the peace of concentration. It has lots of strength. When it has lots of strength, it doesn't run away. When it has strength, it's not afraid. Before, we were afraid of these things, but now that we know them, we're not afraid. We know our strength. When we see a sight, we contemplate the sight. When we hear a sound, we contemplate the sound. That's because we can contemplate. We can hold our ground. We're fearless, brave. Whatever the manifestations of things like sights, sounds, or smells, when we see them today, we will let them go today. Whatever they are, we can let them all go. We see pleasure, we let it go. We see pain, we let it go. Wherever we see these things, we let them go right there. We let them go right there. Discard them right there, continually. We don't take up anything as a preoccupation. We leave things where they are. We've come to our home. When we see something, we discard it. Whatever we see, we look. When we've looked, we let go. All these things come to have no value. They can't do anything to us. This is the strength of insight, vipassana. When we reach this stage, we change the name to insight. We change the name to insight. We see things clearly in line with the truth. That's it. We see things clearly in line with the truth. This is a higher level of peace, the peace of insight. The peace that comes through concentration is hard. It's really hard, for it's really afraid. So when the mind is fully peaceful, what do? You bring it out to train, to contemplate. Don't be afraid. Don't stay stuck. When you do concentration, you tend to get stuck on nothing but pleasure. Yet you can't just sit there and do nothing. Come out. When there's a battle, you're taught to fight. You can't just stay in a foxhole and avoid the bullets. When the time comes really to do battle, when the guns are firing, boom, boom, then if you're in a foxhole, you've got to come out. When the time really comes, you can't fight by crouching in a foxhole. It's the same here. You can't let the mind stay there cowering. This is what you have to pass through in the beginning stages with virtue and concentration. You have to train yourself to explore in line with the established maps and methods. That's the path that you have to follow. At any rate, what I've told you here is just a sketch. When you practice, you don't have any doubts. Don't doubt these instructions. When there's pleasure, look at pleasure. When there's pain, look at pain. As you look at it, try to grind it down, kill it, put it down, let it go. When you know preoccupations, keep letting them go. Whether you want to sit in concentration, do walking meditation, or think about things, it doesn't matter. Try to make your awareness up to the moment, equal to what's going on in the mind. If you're thinking a lot, gather all your thoughts together and cut them off in this way. The things you're thinking, The things you're describing are nothing but thoughts, that's all. All these things are inconstant, stressful, and not self. None of them are for sure. Discard them right then and there.